Christianity claims over 2 billion followers, exerting a reach so vast the global calendar is defined by its founder. This massive presence originates with a man who spent his entire life within a remote strip of the ancient Middle East, subject to a foreign power. To understand how his ideas eventually reached every corner of the planet, we have to look closely at his physical movements within this tiny map. His life suggests that massive influence is not always a product of vast physical territory. Jesus was born into the overwhelming geopolitical reality of the Roman Empire, an era defined by the absolute authority of Augustus. Roman bureaucratic requirements for taxation and a census forced his parents to travel to Bethlehem, anchoring his very birth to the demands of imperial administration. The family faced further danger from Herod mismanagement, from Herod the Great, a local proxy king who ordered a violent purge of young children to eliminate any perceived rivals to his power. These threats forced his family to flee to Egypt as refugees, spending his earliest years under the shadow of state-sponsored violence. Jesus began his life as a marginalized refugee, targeted by the most powerful political forces on earth. His public mission began 30 years later at the River Jordan, where he sought baptism and first declared his purpose. He immediately withdrew into the Judean desert, spending 40 days in complete isolation. In the desert, he faced temptations to use his influence for material wealth and immediate political control, rejecting every offer of earthly power. Upon his return to Galilee, he avoided the halls of learning and power, instead recruiting working-class fishermen as his primary followers. By entrusting his message to the most ordinary members of society, he ensured that his movement would be built on grassroots conviction. While Jesus remained physically confined to a small geographic area, he began a systematic campaign of shattering social and cultural boundaries. At Jacob's Well, he held a public conversation with a Samaritan woman, deliberately breaking the severe ethnic and gender taboos that governed his society. He consistently prioritized outcasts, directly approaching and healing lepers who were legally and socially categorized as untouchable. His movements through neighboring regions and his performance of miracles solidified the belief of his followers, preparing them for a message that would soon bypass local borders. He focused on expanding human empathy within the community, dismantling deep-seated social divisions from the inside out. Eventually, his path led him to the heavily walled capital of Jerusalem, the political and religious epicenter of the region. He entered the city on a humble donkey, choosing a symbol of poverty in a capital defined by Roman military display. He moved directly to the temple and drove out the merchants, a direct challenge to the elite who profited from organized religious life. To religious leaders, his claims of authority were blasphemous. To the Romans, the massive crowds following him looked like the beginning of an armed rebellion. By taking his radical message into the heart of the capital, he made a direct confrontation with the state inevitable. During his final Passover meal, Jesus identified a betrayal within his inner circle, predicting that Judas would soon hand him over to the authorities. The price for this betrayal was 30 pieces of silver, a sum equivalent to the value of a single slave in the Roman market. That night, a mob armed with swords and clubs arrested him in the Garden of Gethsemane. The Roman governor sentenced him to crucifixion at Golgotha, a method of execution reserved for the lowest criminals and designed for maximum public humiliation. By executing him as a criminal, the Roman state intended to permanently erase his influence and maintain order in a restless province. His followers reported a different outcome, claiming he rose from the dead and offered a final message of forgiveness for the very empire that killed him. His final instruction to his disciples was to take his message out from this tiny geographic pocket to the most distant parts of the earth. Over the following centuries, the movement spread into the heart of Rome itself, eventually transforming the imperial capital into the administrative center of the church. The physical trail of Jesus ends in a small rock tomb in Judea, yet the ideas born there eventually reshaped the trajectory of human history. This geographic paradox is the core of his legacy. By building an influence on social connection instead of imperial borders, he ensured his message would outlive the very empire that tried to contain it.